Linda, how would you describe what it is you do and how you work with clients?
Okay, people ask me that all the time because it's so hard to describe what I do. That I'm sometimes described as a reader, an intuitive reader. Sometimes it will be along the lines of medical intuition. I'm also a multi-faith counselor, so I'm a spiritual counselor as well, and reverend. And the way I work with people when they come to me, I will, before they tell me what their intention or their needs are, I ask them if I can just look at them and their energy pattern or energy body. So one of the things that makes my work unique is just that I've been able to expand my sensory awareness so that I can see energy patterns around people in their bodies, in their thought field and emotional field, as well as make connection with their spirit and soul and those who guide them. So I'm also a medium. I talk to people's relatives who have passed over. And all of that is not something that I arranged to do and thought, oh, this is what I want to do. It all happened pretty spontaneously because of I had a spinal injury when I was a child. And so I actually grew up with some pain. And then I injured my neck on top of it. That's when I learned to stop doing gymnastics. It was over for me. And so I had this pain. And I began to get exposed to alternative healing work like craniosacral, which I also do. And then Reiki would be the beginning springboard for me. I was about to give birth to my son and went on a retreat just to get myself ready because they told me it was going to be a rough birth. He was breech, feet, not even feet first, bottom first. And so I was going to try to deliver him naturally. And the short end of it, I met my first Reiki teacher on that retreat. And at the time when he explained Reiki to me, I thought it was very, very vague about how energy medicine works on vibration. I didn't understand it. And then after I had the baby, he came over and I was in a lot of pain and I received my first Reiki treatment and it blew me away that I could feel these waves of energy that pulsed. And within about 20 minutes, without him even touching me, because he was very shy, the pain just lifted off of me. And so after that, I told him, you got to teach me. And so he taught me how to do this Reiki, which is just a form of energetic, hands-on or hands-off healing therapy. Most all cultures I've ever met have a form of this. And then when I started to practice it, that's when I began to discover this opening of my sensory awareness, that I could see energy, I could feel energy. And then I began to be able to pick up on people's thought patterns. And these are all things I actually had when I was younger too. But like most of us, I had purposely tried to subdue it because of the fear of, well, being crazy for one. That's what the biggest fear. And wanting to be like everyone else. But then as I developed the senses, I found how useful it was when being able to help people.
That's amazing. Now, you taught me Reiki 1, so you're a Reiki master at this point, correct? As well.
I'm a Reiki master. So I became a Reiki master back in 1990 to 91. One of those. So I first was exposed to Reiki in 1989. And so that was when it was first coming to Texas. There were very few of us, and it was not well known. And so people were very suspicious of it at the time. But I didn't even tell my parents or my family that I was a Reiki master. For about a year afterwards, I was a Reiki master, and they were like, when did all this happen? But I didn't want them to criticize me or accuse me of it being a cult or things like that. I wanted to experiment with it first. And in fact, the way I helped my mother with it, she was suspicious, is that she had a terrible arthritis in her knees. And I sat down and just put my hands on her and was quietly sending Reiki to her. And she said, okay, I do feel that. She said, it feels like peace, And so if what you're bringing to people is peace and that helps them heal, I'm okay with that.
All right.
And that's how I was introduced into my family. And at this point, all of my family and our children can do Reiki.
Yeah, so
Everybody learned.
and your son, I never got the chance to meet your son, but he's in it as well.
Wait, say it again.
Your son, he practices as
Yes,
well.
my son, his name is Michael.
Michael,
And
yeah.
yes, he practices Reiki as well. He does it kind of his own way. He got his first attunement when he was only 3 years old. And back then we didn't really know if children could be attuned to Reiki. And so that was not my intention to attune him. So I should explain an attunement.
Okay.
Reiki, the way it works is it's really an accelerated form of what comes natural to human beings. So, for example, if the Rei in the Ki is Japanese, and the Rei translates as universal life energy. Mm-hmm. And one of the first American Reiki master called it God, that which everything is made of and is all around us. And then the Ki is the part that comes into your body. In Chinese, they would call it Qi. Mm-hmm. It's what animates us with life force. So that's the Reiki, just to demystify it. We used to have a big debate. Does a master teacher have to attune someone to Reiki, or is it natural? And I will tell you that no, a master teacher does not have to tune you to Reiki. It's an acceleration. And so it's a shortcut way to get to it. But when I studied with teachers around the world, from China, Egypt, and India, etc., they would explain that all of these healing arts have the same source. They all go back to ancient Tibet about 5,000 years ago, and from there to ancient Egypt, and that each culture got a piece of this energy approach. It was actually more than just energy healing. It was for enlightenment, for human beings to really reach their full spiritual potential. Mm-hmm. And so each culture carries a piece of it, and we happen to be in the age where it's coming together, and the cultures are starting to share with one another, so we can see what pieces were missing for us. So for example, when I started to experiment with my son, I'm saying I experimented. What really happened, I was attuning, and that means I was imparting energy to someone to give them a jump start, to be able to do this energy flow that's really known to be a one-way flow. Comes down through the crown of your head, fills you up first, and then it's like a spillover. Your cup runneth over, out through your heart and hands, and that you can share this energy with others. I found out in China, this is part of what their Tai Chi program was about for a long, long time, and acupuncture. That the Chinese teacher I worked with was already, my gosh, he was 90 at the time, or right approaching 90, and excellent at yoga. My goodness, only the 17-year-old in our class could do the postures this man could do at 90. But he told me that in his culture, if you were to meditate, if you were to practice these movements like yoga, and he said India didn't start yoga, they had it too, that and the Tai Chi and Qigong, that in about 20 years' time you would develop your nervous system, refine it in such a way that you would be able to feel energy when just bringing your hand to scan another human being, and you would be able to feel its flow, and where it was not flowing well enough, or whether it was where there was too much energy, and that would tell you where the person needed healing. And so I raised my hand. I was in my 30s back then. Hello, a teacher. And I said, I've already discovered how to do that. It was through Reiki. And he looked at me and he says, Japanese word. He said, no interest. And so after class, he was kinder about it. And he said he knew what Reiki was, and that it was the same as what they were doing, but that it was a shortened step. And he worried about it at the time, that if people move too quickly, what effects it would have. And I do feel that is something we could talk about now or later, because in the United States, sometimes we do move people too quickly. along the their spiritual development, especially in their energetic anatomy. It's not. It's getting better and better, meaning that it's not causing terrible side effects. But used to that, we bring too much energy into a person before they were ready, and they would it would be like a detoxification, pain in the back or too much, or sadness in the heart, things like that. It doesn't kill anybody. You can't hurt anybody, really. It would just be inconveniences and maybe more skillful ways of bringing people up a path, that kind of thing. Boy, I've just gone on and on. So with my son, what I was going to tell you is I was doing an attunement on a person, and my son just suddenly ran up, and he took my hands and he slapped one hand on his, around the area of his sacrum or tailbone, and with the other hand he slapped on his forehead, and I could feel the attunement symbols that we use leave me, and my son attuned himself. And I found out that children do this all the time. Like once I was just standing at the diaper changing table, my sister had told me, keep a watch on my daughter while I, get more diapers. And I felt this heat come over me, and through my hands, I felt the same sensations I have when I do an attunement on someone. And this child drew an attunement from me, and she's an amazing healer to this day. Both of these children are. The strangest one yet I had was I was working with a woman. We're still very dear friends, and she was pregnant, about to give birth to her daughter, who is definitely up in her 30s now. That's how long ago this has been. And I had done Reiki treatments for her for a long time, getting her ready for this birth. And all of a sudden, I had an experience that my Reiki teacher told me later is called angel eyes. But I suddenly could see through this woman's body. I could see the bones, the nervous system, the blood flow, and all the way into the womb, where I saw her child, who was about to be born within a week or so. And this baby put her hands up like this over her head. And I felt that rush of heat come through me, and she drew the attunement symbols from me in the womb still. And so when she was born, her parents, they decided to call it magic, because Reiki was a foreign word to them, and they felt comfortable with that word. And so they would just, do healing on each other that way.
Okay.
So it's that natural, is what I'm saying. It comes naturally to people. I think it's in our instinct, like when we get hurt, where our hands will go to where we have pain. If I have a headache, you'll see me like this. It's the same instinct. It's just a stronger energy flow once you've refined your nervous system and prepared yourself to be a channel like that of energy.
That makes sense. So growing up, religious background, how was that for you?
Okay. It's a good question. So my mother had been raised Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
My father, I didn't find out until I was a grown woman that his mother was actually Jewish. But because of the Holocaust, they were so afraid when they came to the United States, they declared themselves Christians.
Okay.
And so I was raised Christian. He was raised Christian. And my parents decided to come together and become Methodists to raise my sisters and myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a church in Oklahoma we went to, a lovely church. I love this church. Boston Avenue Methodist Church. But I will say at an early age, at the age of 9, actually, I told my parents I didn't want to go back anymore. And I'll tell you why.
Yes.
I've always loved the stories of Jesus and felt an affinity to Jesus. Of course, I'm also of the generation when Jesus Christ Superstar came out. And of course, that scandalized our elders. But for me, I just felt the passion of Jesus and his story and his journey. And I would dream of that one day I would meet Jesus. And in fact, I wrote a book about it by the time I was 11, and they wanted to publish it, my teachers, but they wanted me to take away the dedication, or at the front of the book, I said, this is a true story. This really happened. It was about my encounter with Jesus. Well, it had not happened. And I wouldn't take it back because I wanted it so dearly, and they didn't publish it. But when I left the church, it's because I kept getting this message. And even from the Methodist Church, which people, it's usually, how would I say, a little more open to different interpretations of the Bible. So when I had read the Bible as a child, I really latched on to in the New Testament where Jesus talks about, I think it's John 12:14 or 14:12. I'm dyslexic with numbers, so it's one of those. But especially where Jesus says, and I can't quote perfectly, verily, all these works I do, possibly in the name of God, that if you believe in me, that you can also do and more. Mm-hmm. That's the gist of it, but it was imperfect the way I said it. In my mind, I had always memorized it as all these things I do. If you believe in me, you shall do and more or greater. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so when I read the Bible, I thought it was crystal clear, and I thought everyone understood it exactly like me, that Jesus was saying, I am here to show you what a human potential is, who you really are, how you were created, and what you can become. And so I took Jesus as my model to practice, and so for me, this idea of healing things like this is not sacrilegious. And I was shocked when I was still in my 20s when I learned Reiki. And when people would tell me that, it was shocking to me. Like, they'd say, do you think you're Jesus? I'm like, no, why are you asking? I don't think I'm Jesus. No, but I thought that was what we were here to do. And I found out that, through some branches of Christianity, the understanding is that Jesus being the only Son of God, it actually separates us from Jesus. And that there was actually some groups that were offended at the idea that I felt I could aspire to become better or in myself, that's something that comes through grace. And I get it. The way I see things doesn't exclude any of those ideas, but I still see Jesus as a teacher. And when I went to church at 9, I kept hearing them say that, first of all, God and Jesus would get mixed up a lot in the way it was taught. Mm-hmm. But I kept hearing them say that God would require a sacrifice in order for me to be saved. And I always felt my hands were important. And I have to explain this to you. Why would I think my hands are important? Well, some of it was, I was born with very unusual hands. My hands and feet used to crack and bleed since I was a 1-year-old. And so they had to be, lotioned down for years. I think it was finally 18 years old when I stopped that kind of bleeding. I still have a little bit of it in my feet, just not my hands anymore. Yes, it hurt.
Yeah. I can.
But on top of that, I had a lot of lines on my hand. They looked like an elder's hands. And so a child with these hands that had all these lines and wrinkles even, it upset people quite a bit. And in fact, I used to get comments at school. I remember a boy holding my hand for the first time for a date or dance. And he said, "Oh, gross, your hands are waterlogged." And he dropped my hands. And so we kept hearing this. And they took me to a doctor to find out what was up with my hands and my skin. My skin's very, very sensitive as well. So that when the seasons change, my skin hurts a lot. And I would be like a snake and shed a layer of skin, before the next season. So they took me to a specialist. And my mother was there when he told me. He said, "My gosh, you're so young." And he said, "My wife is 40 years old, and your hands are a lot uglier than hers." I think that's what he said. And my mother was so offended. Of course, we left that doctor. We were like, "Thank you, we don't need you anymore." And one day I came home from school, and my darling mother had been to the library trying to research if anybody knew anything about these kind of skin conditions and with my hands. And what she came up with is a book on palmistry, which is very interesting because I don't think she had really been exposed to palmistry before that.
Yeah.
Her mother had certain, her mother was actually mystical. But my mother was of a different generation. She believed in doctors and science. And so this was a big shock for her to have this book of palmistry. And she opened it up and said, I want you to sit beside me. And she said, look at all these pictures of hands. And she said, according to this book, people with this many lines all over their hands are very old souls. And she said, and these are very rare lines that say you have a highly developed nervous system. And she said, you'll have to really learn to stay balanced with your emotions, but then you can be extraordinary. And she said, don't let anyone shame you about this anymore. That's our conclusion.
Wow.
I think that was so funny. But I did have this feeling myself because I love to draw, I love to write, and I love to play piano and write music. And all those involved my hands. And so I got this idea in my mind that if I stayed with this church and their God, because it didn't feel like my God, it felt like their God, was a bit punishing and would take my hands from me. I felt some accident would occur where I would have my hands chopped off. And it was such an unbearable thought once I had that. I had to leave the church, and my parents allowed it. And so on top of that, at the time, I didn't know it, but my father came out later as being gay. And so he also was dealing with problems with the church not accepting him. And so we kind of made it a free-for-all that two of my sisters chose to continue church. They went with friends, and then the rest of us stayed home. And but it didn't mean I didn't continue my studies of the Bible. I read the Bible many times, and I had my experience of God was that the things that I did that I was considered to be very talented at. So at the time, I was considered kind of a prodigy when it came to writing and drawing and music. But for me, I actually felt like all of these were coming from God, and it was part of my connection with God. And it was a delicious feeling. I remember just this feeling in my mouth. It would get kind of dry, but like cotton candy in a way. A sweetness would come into my mouth, and I would be just in bliss. And I would hear music, and I would translate it to the piano. And so I didn't feel I was writing it. I was receiving music, translating it. And in fact, one of the earliest songs I ever wrote didn't come in English. It came in another language, which I don't speak. But I could hear the sounds, and I knew exactly what it meant. And it was a sweet song. It was a song about a boy going out into a meadow, and there he meets a fairy queen, and the fairy queen and him have these conversations. But the way the words came, it sounded more like a I think it was ya caballero mayata, something like that. And so I would sing those words secretly to myself and tell people it had no lyrics, but I knew the lyrics. And so the same thing when I was drawing and when writing. For example, writing, when you have to write things for school, I would just pose the question to myself, what I was supposed to write about, and then I would hear answers. And so I would pretty much write down the answers, and then the skill involved would be how I was going to arrange the ideas and present it, that kind of thing. And so when I got strong receptions from my teachers, I felt like a phony in that it wasn't that I was such a prodigy, it was that I could hear. And I could see that I was connected to God. And I felt superstitious about taking credit for it, even saying thank you or signing my name, because I thought this is going to be taken away from me if I forget this source. And so I was probably a strange kid in that regard, that I felt very shy about thanking people when they gave me credit for the writing my artwork. So the voices, I just called my people. We didn't have any kind of a structure about guides, like people say now, or even ancestors talking to you. there was nothing like that in place in our family with ideas. I mean, we knew that relatives, after they died, we believed that they watched after us. But in terms of the ones that communicated with me, I just felt they were aspects of God, or aligned with God, like angels, that kind of thing. I didn't bother to call them a name. And I don't think I even, I've met many children that are like this. They just don't think to tell their parents. They assume everybody lives this way. And so I don't recall telling my parents any of this kind of stuff. But I do know there were some, I was considered spacey, you know, that I would kind of go into trances. And that was irritating for my mother. In terms of trying to get me up and out to school, as you can imagine, it is irritating. My son was like that too. You're like, come on, we're on a schedule, hurry. And I would be in such a trance-like state. I would see my mother talking, but I couldn't understand her words. And I used to call it a wedding cake. I'd have to jump down these layers dunk, 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 to get to where I actually could understand her and translate it. And by that time, she was mad. She's like, Linda, pay attention. And so I was aware that these were not considered my best qualities. And my mother used to try to test me on it to see if I was paying attention all the way up until my teenhood, of like, was I aware of where I was going and things, because there were, I had strange experiences. And you didn't even ask for these kind of things. You don't mind that?
I don't mind. Keep going. This is good.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Well, the strangest experience that I had, we had moved to a new school, and I wasn't a little child anymore. I was by then 11 years old. And I had learned how to bike up to this place to play tennis. I was wanting to play tennis. And so I'd ride my bike all the time. It was just around the corner from my home. And I was biking home one day, and I was just happy, is all I can tell you. I felt happy. I sing a lot, and I was singing. And as I was biking, I suddenly realized, uh-oh, I don't know where I am anymore. And that wasn't that uncommon for me, to just get caught up in my head and get, lost, that kind of thing, because I liked that. But this time I was a little worried. So I went up to a house in a neighborhood where I was biking, and I said, do you know where this address is? This is my home. And she said, I do know where that is, but you can't get there on a bike. And I was like, well, I came on a bike. And she said, And so they loaded my bike up and drove in their truck and drove me home. Now, as a parent myself, I can only imagine how upsetting that would be.
Yeah.
For your child to be delivered like this, when she was only supposed to be a block or two away. And for me to have no explanation, and there wasn't enough time passage for me to have biked that far. It was a mystery. Like it was still daylight, etc. And I couldn't explain it to my parents either, but it was something I really struggled with even when I started driving, because it's so easily to go into trance when you're driving. And I would just suddenly be somewhere else, sometimes in another city. And I had no idea where I was. And it was all very upsetting at the time. And again, I felt these were not good qualities. In fact, my mother had a bad term for it, I'm sorry to say, of how could I be so smart and yet so stupid? Because she just couldn't understand, how do I not know where I've been or how I got there? And it is scary, you wonder where, did someone pick me up or something? But I would be happy. I had no memory of something like that. And sometimes I had the kids in the car, my little sisters, and nothing happened to them either. We were just driving, and then the next thing you know, I was in a different place. So these were things I couldn't understand, and I tried really hard to get normal. And I think by the time, so with my religious background, you had asked about that. At this point, I didn't connect any of this with God anymore. At this point, I actually felt it was me being lost in the world, because I kind of forgot about something happened to me when I was 11, that I'm not the only one who's had this happen. In fact, there's a movie someone brought me. It's kind of a comedy where the same thing happened to this young man. And this is what it is. Remember when I told you I had my people who would talk to me? That after the experience of like biking and getting lost, my mother told me later they were getting worried about me. Like, should they go see a therapist?
Right.
I didn't know any of that, but what I did know was our family was starting to go into some troubled times. My mother and father were having trouble with their marriage. And we were all having trouble adapting to this new city, this new home. But so I was awakened one night by my people, the ones I'm calling my people, that some people would call spirit guides. And they actually called the meeting. And this is how real it was for me. I got up, went into the kitchen, at the kitchen table, and as far as I was concerned, I was having a meeting with my people. And they told me that the time had come, that I was going to need to become, I don't think they use the word grounded, but more like rooted in the world. I need to be an ordinary teenager like everybody else. And because of that, they weren't going to let me see them or hear them anymore. Of course, I didn't like that. Right. And they told me that was non-negotiable. That's just what had to happen. And that if I wanted to, I could write a goodbye poem. And I did. I still have my goodbye poem, and it's very beautiful. They told, it was based on my reaction. Oops. Did you lose me?
You're back.
Got you back.
Okay. I said, if you're going to leave me, at least tell me some of the secrets of the universe. I was like, I want to know, is there really a God? If so, what is God? It's not really man, right? I mean, I really wanted to know. I said, in Jesus, how much is real? How much is your prophet? How much is not real? That I was educated enough to know there were a lot of questions around it. They wouldn't tell me. They said I would need to live with suspended knowledge like everybody else. So suspended knowledge is where you don't have to go into judgments or into a place where you feel you're right and everybody else is wrong, but it's where you gather the information that you have from your experiences, knowledge, and you let it sink in and find a resonance of truth somehow. For me, it's the difference between, does it feel loving or does it feel fearful? And if it feels loving and feels good, I can accept that information then, unless there's reason to be fearful of it, that kind of thing. But so with my suspended knowledge, they said to not worry, that there would be a day when I would be brought into, up to the hands of God, where there was a pool of knowledge and I would be allowed to gaze in and have all the information I would need. And so I wrote a poem about this, of how to live with this without knowing exactly what the truth is. And they pretty much told me there really are very few people on the planet who really know, and that most everyone is living with a form of truth that is somewhat right and somewhat not right. You see what I mean? I laugh to myself. I think about when I die. I still believe in the continuation of our soul and spirit. And I think I will be laughing hysterically of how wrong we were about stuff. That kind of amuses me. But so after I had this goodbye session with my peeps, my people, they took me back to bed. And one of them, strangely, I don't really remember what they looked like, just figures made of light. That's how I saw them, just outlined in light. One of them leaned over me and asked me to take a vow. And I said, okay. And the vow was to keep my heart pure. And my mind raced at the time because the way I was raised, pure was really only used around sex, and it meant don't have sex. So I wasn't exactly sure what they were asking of me, how to keep my heart pure, but I agreed. I took the vow. And it was interesting how that vow has rippled through my life, and how my father intuitively responded to it. And I don't know I think it's fascinating that he picked up on it. Once he told me something like that happened to him when he was in Egypt. He almost died once as a boy in Egypt, and he took a different choice than I did when it came to the vow. He told me that in this world, people with good hearts or pure hearts don't make it. That he thought that the world would eat me alive, and that I wouldn't be able to earn an income. That he said everyone he knew who made money, and my father was a multimillionaire. He said it was not done honestly and with the best of intentions. And he said the wealth is coming. He said you wouldn't believe what the world is really like. And in fact, before he died, he told me, I want to mentor your son, but if I told him the truth about how it is in business and politics, I don't know if I would destroy him. And I said, is it that bad? And he said, it is. And I said, then don't tell us. We don't want to know. I mean, I want to know generally. We know that. We kind of already know. There's a lot of duplicitous things that go on. And there are a lot of scandals. But it is a challenge. I mean, we deal with it every day. Now, we have all this news. How to live knowing that there are, there's another word for scandals. What is it when we suspect that there's a lot of people involved in behind the scenes? What do we call that? Conspiracies, right, right. Yeah. A lot of them really are true. They're happening. And how not to be discouraged and feel you have to surrender to it in the world or compete at that level. That's the big challenge, right? And so my father and I fought over this from that point on all the way up to when I was in college. And I was trying to tell him I was making a name for myself as a writer back then, and that some wealthy families were going to sponsor my career, etc. Thinking my dad would be happy. I wanted to hear, oh, congratulations, honey, I'm proud of you. That's where I was going. But instead, my dad went back to the old theme and he said, those people are going to eat you for lunch. That you must learn to manipulate like everybody else, or you won't make it in the world. And I had a young moment where I told my dad, I hate you. What I really meant was stop saying that to me. It was crushing to me. And that my father was quiet and he said, here's your mother, pass the phone. And I didn't hear from him for a year. I was in college in another state and he didn't talk to me again until I went home that summer and he was in crisis. And it was interesting because my father was a man, has many talents, and I've since found out both of my parents, all my family, are as sensitive as I am, to differing degrees. The first time I did Reiki on my father, he could feel it, and he knew exactly what he was doing. But you know, when I talked about having my people around me, my father had some very beautiful guides with him too. But then there was this shadow figure that started to overtake us, and I sent it back. And I realized that was kind of what my dad agreed to, that he kind of decided to work a little bit on the dark side too. I don't know how to put it any other way. The dark and the light. Right. And most of us are mixed, honestly. It's not astonishing, I guess I would put it. Me too. I've traveled different directions. It's just that I affirm all the time what my intention is and my heart is. I'm here to help, to serve, to heal, and that I don't like the term light worker. We have to use it because it's well known.
Yes.
Because then it means that we prefer light over dark. Whereas really, if you talk about the wholeness of creation, it's light and dark. It's both. And so it's not an accurate way to speak. But it's really more about heart intention, perhaps, and maybe love versus hate. In that love is an energy that bonds and brings together, and hate is a divider. And so, again, even those terms I don't look at super judgmentally, except for what are we trying to go for? What's the effect we want? And I'm for the coming together of oneness. So there I put it in that terms.
I like that. I like that. Okay, so let that take us into that dream. Let's talk about that now.
Yeah, I had posted on Facebook about having a dream recently, and someone said you must have set an intention for guidance, and she was right.
Okay.
I often do that with dreams, but I especially have recently because um, I guess I've passed, like everyone else, through different periods of some sadness
Mhm.
about some people that I do know who have died with the virus, but also the I guess the seeing people in the state of fear, and that's some sadness and things like that too. And then with the work I'm doing, that I wanted to be able to not just help people get over the hump, but if we're going to heal, what is healing? Let's really do it. And I had been feeling an inadequacy about not helping people as profoundly as I want to.
Okay.
Uh, and I'm like that. Uh, but I don't mind that I'm like that. It keeps me striving for what's more, what's more.
Mhm.
That especially when we have this time on our hands. I know, for one, I have always wished that the world would stop for a while for me to catch up. Then my parents had watched a musical when I was a kid called "Stop the World, I Want to Get Off." Have you
Mhm.
ever heard of this?
I have not.
It must have been very 60s, from the 1960s. And I couldn't understand that play, but I got the concept. Stop the world, I want to get off. Because I had been feeling that since I was a little child, that it speeds by, and I can't catch up. That's my feeling.
Mm.
And so this is the closest we've ever had to it, where the world seemed to stop. It had a side effect to it that isn't my favorite, meaning that, there's suffering.
Yes.
And I wouldn't have ever wished for suffering. But since the world finally stopped for me over here, I wanted to see, well, what do I want to do with this time that I've always been asking for it? I haven't been bored at all like some people talk about. Instead, it's more of that, well, like I told you today, time is still speeding for me, and I am still doing conferences with people on the phone. I still do readings, still do healing work for people. And so it hasn't been that different than my ordinary life. So I'm purposely trying to take fewer people for just a bit to gather up what I want to do and to feel what the next step is for me and for humanity. And
Mhm.
so I had set that intention. What happens next after this? Because we're not going to be the same.
No.
Nothing's going to be the same. And so I do believe in this idea that collectively, if we hold a positive outcome and we strive towards the best possible outcome for the higher good of all, that we will move more into that direction. We'll talk about my belief of different worlds in a moment, but I want to go into that world.
Okay.
And actually, when I do healing work, sometimes I talk to people like that. I was working with a person very dear to me who was very sick, and it seemed to be the coronavirus. Getting testing wasn't possible, but she was unable to breathe one night, and it was very scary. And so as I worked with her, and I felt I'm helping, but it's not helping enough. They said, we're going to make a leap. We're going to leap into another version of reality in which you do not have this virus, in which you are fully healed and whole. And if you'll do it, let's go.
Mhm.
And so I said, it's not just make-believe. It'll feel like make-believe, but I believe our imagination is part of our spiritual gifts as to how to see in the unseen world, the inner world. So I said, use your imagination and tell me what's it going to take to get you there. So we did, instead of me giving her a guided meditation, she gave me her images and we worked with what it would take to get her well. And so we worked actually a couple hours. And then I hung up the phone and I was still trying to press the button to hang up, and an explosion occurred in my kitchen. And I mean an explosion. It was so loud. It was like a gunshot, but the tone was slightly different. It was a little more like maybe when a transformer blows,
Mhm.
but closer. So
Mhm.
I expected to see smoke and fire, or I didn't know what it was, or if someone had shot a gun through my window. I didn't know. But I went running towards the kitchen and everything was perfectly fine. There was nothing. The only thing I felt is when I flipped the switches to turn lights on, there was a very, very minute delay, tiny delay, so much so that the other members of the household didn't experience the delay, but I did.
Mhm.
And because once I turned the lights on once, they were perfectly fine. No smell of smoke. Nobody in my family or the neighbors heard a sound at the time I heard this explosion. I was shaking. It was so startling. And I called my sisters back, and one of my sisters had a phenomena happen at the same time, that there was a knocking at her door. And, we're being quarantined, so it was a little weird. And
Yes.
so they decided, oh, must be another sister. So they yelled, come in. There was another pounding on the door. They said, come in. And they went to the door, and nobody was there. And so I said, well, it was a different phenomena than mine, but that feels like a phenomena too.
It
But
is.
mine, I had this feeling about it that something happened, like popping through a dimension, if you want to put it that way.
Mhm.
And do you know what came to mind is there's a friend of mine, I won't reveal her name because I don't have her permission to tell this story, but she was a music teacher for some people who have become famous. And she told me the story of when these people were children or young people. And she would have them play with her band. And one woman who's internationally famous was in an unknown playing with her band. And the teacher reports there was suddenly this, I think she said it was like an explosion. For her, she thought it was an earthquake because things shook as well. And she afterwards, she asked everyone, nobody experienced the sound or the quaking, but she said it's the moment she can look back on when that young person became famous. It's sort of like she shifted her whole reality and went into this another phase of life where she was an internationally known person. And she said it happened a second time with another student right before she became famous. And that's what went through my mind, is not that we made anyone famous, but that we shifted something about reality. And my sister called me, not my sister, I'm sorry. My friend called me back the next day and told me, you know what? I think I had that virus, but you shifted me into another place where I don't. And she went to get a test and it was clear.
Mhm.
And so we will never know, since we didn't get to test her before. But so these things, this had already happened with me some days before, maybe a week before the dream.
Mhm.
And so this dream I'm telling you about, when I went to bed, I actually had told a friend who wanted to talk to me, I'm going to go to bed early because I feel discouraged, honestly. And you don't want me to have a conversation with me like this. It'll be complaining conversation. So let
Mhm.
me just sleep and start a new day. So when I went to sleep, it was the last dream of the night, meaning I sometimes get up in the night, go back to sleep.
Mhm.
And it was, I didn't actually know I was sleeping. I thought I was still awake, but I believe I was actually sleeping. That the part of the dream that I caught, that I can remember, was being on a ship. And it was a huge ship where we were seated as if we were in one of those airplanes that have many decks.
Mhm.
But it was still a ship because we were on the water. And we had, like the Titanic, had some sort of a collision that most people didn't know about. I had heard about it because I'd gotten up to use the restroom, and I heard the crew talking, and I could see water starting to come in through some cracks in the ship's hull. So I knew we were in trouble. And in fact, they weren't sure they were going to be able to save us. And so I went back to my seat, and I was really making my own personal exit plan. I didn't think I could save everybody, but I was going to see if I could get me and my family out. And I just want to know where all the exits were, so that if people started panicking, we wouldn't get crushed, that we'd know how to move in and outward, at least into the water. But luckily, um, disaster was averted, and we found a foreign port in another country that was able to receive us and unload everyone. So I disembarked. before the ship sank. And now when I went to explore this new city, and it was an ancient city. The streets were cobbled. It was pretty empty. It was towards sunset, and I went into a shop where it was like a market, a small one, and I bought something, and the shopkeeper wrapped it in a brown paper bag and handed it to me, and then he started rolling down the shades, so I knew he wanted me to leave, and he wanted to close. So I left. And then I got back out in the street and realized I'm cold. I don't have a coat. So I had to go back to this shop. And I said, I forgive me, but I've left my coat here. And so he reached around and he gave me a coat. And it was one I recognized, and I wouldn't put it on. He tried to put it on me. But it was this old ratty coat that I had. It's warm, but I actually gave it to my ex-husband, or my son's father, last year, and I didn't want that coat back. I was like, no, that's not it. And he said, I remember I had a really new coat, and it was kind of fancy. It seems like it was black velvet or something. I wanted this coat. And so he wanted to go home, so he unlocked a door to a back room and said, you can go look for it yourself. So I went back into this back room. And there was a man standing there with my coat over his arm, and he was holding it as he welcomed me in, almost like he was a butler. And he said, come in. And I was very surprised to see there was a party going on. There was this one long wooden table, and people of all ages were sitting on either side of it and really enjoying themselves. It was a celebration of some sort. And when I came in, everyone stopped talking and looked up at me very expectantly, not like I was intruding, but like, she's here.
Yeah.
And so when they looked up at me, my response was I raised this paper bag over my head and started singing a song. And I've practiced lucid dreaming, and that's where there's a part of you watching the dream to see if you are dreaming or not. And so part of me was watching my strange behavior, that I raised this bag over my head and that I could sing this other language, kind of like the music I told you I did when I was a child. But I knew exactly what I was seeing, and it translated as this is my blood you drink, this is my body you eat. Remember me when you eat and drink. And so it was actually a Last Supper song, right? Everybody at the table, they knew this song and they were really happy I was singing it. And so they started singing it too in the same language. And the funniest part about it is they were so enthusiastic with gusto. And then all of a sudden, people started mumbling and murmuring because no one knew the end of the song. And when we realized nobody knew the song at the end, we started laughing about that too. And they enjoyed it. They invited me to the table like I was friend then. So they sat me by this man who was seated at a place of honor at the head of the table. And they told me he was a prophet. And they said he could channel God. And so we all became quiet, went into a prayerful state. And he started bringing forth this message. And it was very stern. And in fact, again, because it was coming out in a different language, I caught certain words. But I got the gist of it. We were being chastised for being so frivolous. That was one of the words. I thought maybe it was because of our laughter, but also because we weren't taking things seriously. At this celebration, that was obviously a holy celebration. And then secondly, I was personally chastised for being non-punctual. And that word was said in English, punctual at arriving at the table. And so I received the chastisement, and then the man came out of his trance, and he said, I can't get any more messages. I can't get any positive messages. And I said, I can do this. And so he got up and let me sit in his chair, and I dropped into a state of trance, or some people would call it more of spiritual reflection. And I started to hear a voice speaking to me, and I suddenly realized I'm in connection with the Christ. And so I started to follow his instructions, and he had me open this brown paper bag that I've been carrying around, and inside it there was bread and, for some reason, cubes of cheese. That's a mystery to me. I don't know why. It was Swiss cheese, so maybe it was holy cheese. Ha ha ha. But being true to the dream, it was these cubes of Swiss cheese and bread, and I opened it up and distributed it to the table. And now what I didn't write on Facebook was I'm actually on a very strict diet right now because of, I already told you the strange thing with my skin. I've always had autoimmune type issues. And so I'm working with a woman, a doctor who is, I blanked out on the name. It's called functional medicine doctor. And so we're really working to bring inflammation down in my stomach and gut. And so I can't have bread or cheese, which in the dream, I took note of that I've sort of banned those foods, but here they were sanctified foods. And I'll talk about that in a minute, because I was receiving information that I didn't share with everyone. That was just for me. That instantly, one of the comments, one woman picked up on that, and she said, there's stuff here you didn't remember. Oh, I remembered. I just didn't write it down because it was just for me. But so I distributed that. And when I woke up from this dream, I was still distributing the food. When I woke up and was aware I was in my bed, that I'd been sleeping, but I could still hear the voice. And I was still feeling connected to the Christ. And I felt very, very altered. And the strange thing is I had one of those feelings too of, which world am I in? Where am I? And who am I? Now, there was one time in my life when I did wake up and I literally felt I had been traveling so much I didn't really recognize the name Linda Ball. Now, it wasn't like this recently. I looked around and was like, oh, yeah, it's me, Linda Ball. But this other time, years back, I woke up and it was like when you wake up in another country and you forgot, you're like, where am I again? Oh, yeah, I'm traveling in Italy, whatever. But I woke up in this bedroom and it felt like I was the journeyer. I was like, where's this place? I think I recognize this. And I recognize the man sleeping there, but I don't know where it is. And I came back slowly and I was like, oh, yes, that's right. And it was like I had a script. I remember thinking, I'm Linda Ball. Oh, yeah, I have a son and I have sisters. Oh, yeah, I have a father who's gay and a mother who deals with these issues. It was just like a script. I was like, okay, I'm in character. I got it. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of like that when I woke up, that I felt that the who I am had an option to be another version of who I am, put it that way. So that was a dream. When I started to write the dream down, it was because I felt there are some dreams that you can tell it's just your mind processing things that you've watched on TV or that people have said. Yes. And there was some of that there maybe. I was surprised because consciously I hadn't really connected to this is Easter, and I hadn't started. I wasn't really planning a holy celebration of any kind. In fact, my family's not like that. They dye Easter eggs, and we hunt for them, and they have a dinner, that kind of thing. We all are spiritual, but we kind of do it separately on our own way, and not always through a church or something like that. In fact, less often through a church. So it was so interesting to me that on a subconscious level, I was processing it, that this was actually Easter weekend. But the other part of it was some dreams feel more like visitations. And what I mean by that is that sometimes I feel people who have died, and even those on other dimensions, whether master teachers, if you want to call it that, Jesus, God, actually, that it's the best time to get our attention and to communicate. So I do believe a lot of messages come through dreams that are sometimes just for you, and sometimes they're meant to be transmitted to others, depending on intention and how you've placed yourself in the world. I guess I'd put it that way. And I had set an intention, I wanted something for the world. that kind of thing. And I thought it was all very clever, the way my mind was translating it to sinking ship like the Titanic. I thought that was funny. But a similar feeling, I mean, of like, are we going to sink? We're going to die? And in this case, in my version, no, we don't die. It's a close call, but we went into a holy place instead. As when it was an ancient city, it felt like a holy city. And that the opening of the back door was important to me too. Mm-hmm. Doors often mean to go into either another version of a world, another part of yourself, sometimes another dimension, actually. In my meditations, I actually have had, I think the most profound one I ever had was when I told you, even though I was raised Christian, I left the church, and some of us really can't find our spirituality back through our own religion that we're raised with. I actually had to study through other religions. So I studied a lot of religions, and at this time, it was really through more Buddhism and some Hinduist philosophy. Some of my teachers were yogis. And so they taught me about the chakra system and how it relates to, our organs and bodies. I'd studied all of that. And there was in the community that I was studying, Kriya Yoga, they have a tradition of a being who, like Jesus, dies but doesn't die, meaning he's resurrected, or the other idea would be that he assumes a light body, and that's the one they call Babaji. That in the tradition I studied, he had a name when he was alive as a human being, and I'm sorry I can't remember the name. It starts with N, but when he, instead of dying, he translated into light. So there are many people who see him, experience him, discover him in that culture. And so when I had first studied with my teacher, I remember they had a portrait of him on this one was painted because he lived before photography, in a time before photography. And I was drawn to this portrait, this beautiful being. And the minute I looked at it, it crashed to the floor, glass shattering everywhere. And I felt it was connected to me somehow. But of course, they said nothing about it. One, because it sounds arrogant. But two, I didn't want to take responsibility for breaking this picture. But later, my teacher, this was my second Reiki teacher, he told me, this is my tradition. And he was half Indian. And he said, Babaji is real. He's a being, and I've met him. He lives in the Himalaya mountains. And in fact, we were the naughty students that we were. He had this portrait, and one of the older students, when the teacher left the room, we got behind the portrait, and there was a photograph back there. And we wondered, is this the being that they're calling Babaji? So I didn't know, again, suspended knowledge. Until I know, I don't know. But I went home, and I was initiated into this lineage called the Cobra Breath and a lineage. And I had been given papers to read, like mantras, and I wasn't even reading it seriously, kind of like in this dream. It was more frivolous, but interested, curious, that I was trying to pronounce this mantra because, I'm an English speaker. And so all I did was just walk through it, and my doorbell rang. I was like, what? And I looked out of my window. I could see no one at the door. I went out, no one was at the door. It's like, that was weird. I came back into my room, and I was about to read again. And all of a sudden, I could feel this presence, this energy. And I started to move. It was moving me. It scared me. It scared the bejeebers out of me. I didn't like it. I have a controlling part of me. I didn't like being moved, and I said, I don't know what this is, but I'm not going to allow this. And instantly, this presence I felt separated from me and said that I could hear him. He said he was trying to show me these postures, which I later found out were the postures of Kriya Yoga. I didn't know that back then. And he said there was another way we could do it, not as skillful, but that he could just move energy around my body and then flash a blue light when I hit the postures right. So it was a little laborious, but it saved my autonomy And I was willing to do that. What was so amazing is this being was not visible to me. I could hear him, and when he touched me, my skin would indent. He had a realness to him, more than, it wasn't just a fantasy. And anyway, this being moved towards me, and uh, I got ahead of myself, sorry. It looked like he was going to kiss me. I was like, what's going to happen? But he actually breathed into me. I mean, inhaled, I guess I would call it. And I could hear these 7 pops. Pop, 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 pop. And I had had a vision the night before from a woman who had been walking with me. And we just walked in the woods. I lived by the woods back then, Texas woods. And she said, I didn't want to upset you, but I kept sensing this bearded man walking with you. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And she said, will you just let me do something? And she touched my forehead, and I went into a dream, or a trance, if you want to call it. And it looked like a pi symbol on my forehead, which split in half. And I suddenly started to see this hallway. And as I moved through this hallway, doors flew open. There were exactly 7 doors, and they flew open with this pop sound. Pop, pop, pop. And then on retrospect, I realized these are like the chakras in that tradition. And so the 7 doors opened, and the 8th one at the end of the hallway opened of its own accord, but only a crack. Mm-hmm. I could see light glowing through it. And I peeked in, and it kind of had a feel of India. I think I got that idea because it felt like I saw an elephant or something. I don't know. But a man walked through it, and there was so much light around him, I could only see his outline. He walked out the door and shut the door behind him and walked past me. And as I watched him go past, he turned around and said, are you coming? And I received the invitation, and he said, yes. And instantly I found myself moving across the planet, hearing people's cries for help. And I was sending healing to them. And then I came out of the trance. I asked the woman, what just happened? And she said, I don't know. She said, I touched your forehead and you went to sleep. And so that was the first time I experienced that symbology, like a door of taking you to either through a chakra, or in this case, through a different level. So going to the back door in the dream, to me, related to that, moving into a different vibrational space, dimensional space, that kind of thing, where a learning or a teaching is possible. So what I think about when I bring messages through for people, whether it's their ancestors on the other side, or whether it's angelic beings, because I do believe there are a species that we call angels, that for the most part are helpers. And then I think there are also these other ones that we might call guides, that have been, some have been alive like we have been in bodies, some maybe not. But there's a lot more to our world than just this 3D world. In fact, even in science, they know that, I think they say 95%, maybe it's even 98% of dark matter, meaning that it's unseen, they don't know what it is. And I believe it's these other worlds we can travel into, honestly. And so the problem is, it's such a higher frequency than we're in this, where things are 3D, it's a slower vibration.
Right.
And so it's hard to give messages. And so there are certain people that do this work, either come in this way naturally or refine themselves to be able to stand between the worlds, so to speak. And I feel that dreams are that access for everybody. And then, people like me who bring messages through, that's another way of access. But the big challenge is where we can just find a meeting point in the middle. Mm-hmm. So that was a dream, and it sparked a lot of conversation. When I wrote the dream, I hesitated about it because of talking about Jesus and the Last Supper can be a heated debate in terms of people with their belief systems, and a lot of people find it hard to understand where I am with this because of having studied, like I say, with Indian teachers as well. And I do feel we find our own path, and that really the main chord we're looking for, and I believe this came from Jesus even, we're just looking for the chord of love. And that's in, I would say, every religion I know about. There are probably others I don't know about that they're not about love, but I'm not talking about them. I'm saying that people who worship good people, and their desire is to bring goodness into the world. And so all of that's equal to me. Having been raised in a Christian community, I actually found, I don't really need to change my status in that regard. I actually don't belong to a particular church. I have some beautiful friends that want me to become Catholic, and I was like, I probably won't do any form of initiation that way. I had my own spiritual baptism, though, and it seems to always come back to Jesus for me. The first time my childhood dream, remember I said I wanted to meet Jesus and I lied about it, that I'd met Jesus. My dream actually came true, and it was through the healing work that there was a woman. This has been many years now. I don't even know how long, over a decade for sure. Probably 20 years ago. But there's a community right here in Texas and Dallas and in Tyler of people who would come here because they had terrible autoimmune conditions, allergies like me, but I mean crippling for them, chronic fatigue, and they couldn't eat, they were so sick. So the people would fly here because we have a doctor here, and I really don't want to promote his name either way right now. But there was a doctor here that was known to work with these extreme cases where other doctors can't help them anymore, right? And he apparently is successful with many people, but there are some people with whom he was not successful. And they're the fallout community. That's my word, the fallout community. And I found out about them because they have to live in these apartments that are stripped of cloth, where there's foil over the windows. I mean, these are people who are really suffering. And sometimes they are allergic to every food, but foreign meats or things they've never been exposed to and built up resistances to. It's a tough life. And so there was this one woman, her friends, I'd been successful with her friends. That's a whole nother story. But so they sent me to this woman's door, and she told me, I'm so allergic, you need to descent yourself for 3 days before you come. So she sent me special products, lotions and shampoos with no scent, and that wouldn't activate her allergies. So all cleaned and scrubbed, and hurting in my case because my skin was so dry without my special lotions. So I arrived at her door, and she still wouldn't let me in. And she said, this was a woman way taller than me. She was about 5'8", and 86 pounds. She was wasting away. Basically, she'd been left to die. The doctors didn't know how to help her anymore. And she said, you have to understand, my very life is at risk, and that I will not let you in this door if you don't hand the healing and our protection over to Jesus Christ. And I said, I like Jesus Christ, sure. Absolutely. She says, I'm not messing with you. I am absolutely serious. You have to promise. And I said, let's do it. We officially hand over our protection and the healing to Jesus. I say Jesus the Christ, but Jesus Christ is fine too. I say that because to me, Christ is a station he attained. But so I use it a little differently. But so I made the vow. And we went in, and we went to her sad metal bed with these terrible cloths that she wasn't allergic to. And I said, I'll just do the treatment for you here on the bed. And I pulled up a chair at the head of the bed where I guess didn't have a headboard to make sense of this. It was just, like a cot bed. And so I did what we do with Reiki. I started with the hand positions. I became a channel for this healing energy, and I started to send it to her. And I began to be really more like a technician, to tell you the truth. Healers can do this. I looked at her field. It was full of holes, her auric field. And most of us, when I talk about an aura, it's an energy that contains us kind of like an eggshell, but it's made of light. And hers was punctured with a lot of holes. Frankly, she looked like a T-shirt that had been worn too much, where it was torn open. And so I thought, well, no wonder she's so sick. I just need to seal up all these holes so she can contain energy, and we can start her healing. So I'm in that kind of mindset. There's nothing wrong with that mindset, but it's still a limited mindset. So I'm doing this work, and now I'm over by her feet. And I looked back at the chair I left behind, and it was glowing. I'm like, what is this chair glowing for? And the more my battery's going low, so I'll do something about it in a minute. The more I looked at the glowing chair, it began to take a form, and it began to look like a man, a bearded man. And then I began to see him the way I would recognize Jesus Christ. Now, people often ask, was he black or white? Well, this isn't an issue to me at all, because whenever I see the Christ, I see the outline of a man in gold light. And so he's not black or white for me, but he is a man. It looks more male. So anyway, I saw him and I recognized him in this way. And he spoke to me. It was super clear for me. He looked up at me and he said, tell her, indicating the woman laying on the bed, tell her that even as she suffers, I have suffered. And that even as I was victorious, she will be victorious. And he leaned down and kissed her on the forehead. And when he did, it wasn't her, it was me that responded. It felt like a lightning bolt went into my forehead and water poured down my face. I mean, it wet my collar and everything. Later, people talked to me about this, that this is called a spiritual baptism. And it happens to other people. I'd never heard of it. But there was a feeling that came with it so profound, I was sobbing, but not sad or happy sobbing, a whole different kind of sobbing, of almost like, it was a good overwhelm, maybe. It was joyous, maybe. So I was sobbing. This poor woman who was so sick and didn't trust me anyway, looked up and said, what's wrong with you? And I told her my vision. My experience was more than a vision, and the evidence of it on my face and shirt. And she was not surprised. She said, well, let me explain to you why I put this under the protection of Jesus Christ. She said, when I was in the hospital last, there was another woman sick like me that got up out of her sleep and came over. And she says, I think the woman's crazy. But anyway, she said, she looked at me and said, Jesus just told me to tell you that he will heal you, but it won't be all at once. Because if he healed you today and you looked in the mirror, you wouldn't know who you are. That it's going to be a gradual healing, and that's how most healing is done. And she said, so when I saw you, I remembered that I knew this is part of that gradual healing. And so she did heal this woman, and she returned home. I'm happy to say she got out of Dodge. She got out of Dallas. But she gave me this huge gift to see that there really is a being that we call the Christ, that has a essence and can interact with us. And I've since had several other visitations. I can't make it happen, but I'm really blessed when it happens, and I take the opportunity, like, oh, here we go. It's often when I'm asking others, I'm asking help for others. But there was one time when I did see the Christ again, and it wasn't a church, and I'm putting several stories together. Right. It wasn't a church, and I had asked, since I wasn't raised Catholic, tell me the truth about this thing about my body and blood that you eat and drink. I mean, is it figurative? Is it literal? I mean, what is that about? Teach me. And so that was what I proposed. And okay, I know, not being Catholic, I'm not supposed to receive Mass, but I did. And I didn't feel a whole lot with the wafer, except that it wasn't gluten-free, I could tell that. But I took the wine and something happened to me. I couldn't swallow. I was like, oh my gosh. I went back to my seat struggling because not being able to swallow felt like not being able to breathe. It was very upsetting and claustrophobic. And I was struggling and struggling. And all of a sudden, Christ spoke to me, turned and looked at me. He was standing with a child, incidentally, at the time. That was just watching the ceremony. But he turned and said, the degree to which you can't, let's see, how did he put it? The degree to which you can't receive love is the degree to which you can't receive me. Open all those places where you do not feel worthy of love, and then you receive me. It was profound. I said, I don't know how. How do I do that? Because like other people, I'm very self-critical, and have been most of my life, to an extreme even. So I was like, I don't know how, help me. And I thought, it began to feel like I was going to pass out. And I was like, this is going to be awful. I passed out in this chapel, you know, with, and the wine pouring out of my mouth. But all of a sudden, whoop, I was able to swallow and this warmth moved through me. That was phenomenal. And I remembered that I had been told years ago when I was still studying Kriya Yoga, I had a vision again, but I wasn't asleep this time, but I saw this image of Babaji and the Christ standing together. It was like a cardboard cutout. They didn't look real. But I heard a voice above say, Babaji is not your guru. Christ Jesus is. And then suddenly, there was just this sensation that went through me. And I have come to see that's true. Christ Jesus is my guru. So that I may not be a traditional Christian, but a number of times I've been asked by Christ to accept him as my teacher. Mm-hmm. I would even say master teacher. And so I actually am able to work with different teachers as well, but that's my primary one. And so I'm both I'm definitely that spiritual, but not religious, but maybe I am religious in just with my own way and with my own tenets. That the main objection I've ever had with churches is judgment of, that's almost all churches. Any case of judging or feeling a superiority that we're right and you're wrong, that instantly tells me, okay, this isn't from God. This is human beings. As God has put many paths forward for us. And if we really, really follow inside ourselves, sometimes it takes following other people's paths to find your path. And you go, okay, this is the right teaching for me. I suppose, you know, the part of the dream where I was late coming to the table and I was chastised. Mm-hmm. I did take that in a personal way. It's not the first time that I've heard it from my guides, and that there's a reluctance tendency in me. You know, there's some people, they get a message and they're out spreading it around the world. Mm-hmm. There's a part of me, it is linked to my integrity, but it's a little too far over the edge of being doubtful, maybe. What I want to share is things that are true and not deceptive. Yes. And so I tend to hold back more than I probably should, because and especially I'm not a person who likes to argue, and I don't love being controversial. Mm-hmm. But I've actually had to just accept that I already am. And that it's time for me to have more of a presence on the internet, not just with the small community that I'm with, and to be willing to talk about what my experiences are. My beliefs are experientially based. Mm-hmm. Just because I tend to be so skeptical, if I don't have an experience of it, I won't tell you about it or that it's right or wrong until I actually have an experience.
Yeah.
But I'd like to do that more. And so I jumped at your opportunity. You know what? A woman who made some comments. She also has a presence on YouTube, the Bhakti House. She responded to my dream talking about the imagery of the coats, and that she had a vision once about Joseph in the coat of many colors, about what coats can represent. You know, the shedding, like the shedding of old skins, or how we clothe ourselves. Because I actually feel the soul, the spirit in a coat, so to speak, that's clothed with our experiences. But for some reason, I wanted to tell you that. I don't know why. That about the different coats that we choose to put on. I suppose because with global warming, I actually thought the coat thing was an interesting concept. Because global warming doesn't just mean places heating up, it's getting colder, it's just changing. And we have felt very vulnerable in the elements. And really, I felt that there's a way of being clothed in the world that, again, I'm going to do an imperfect quoting of the Bible. I do this all the time. I never remember things exactly as people say them, but in the way it makes sense to me. But what drove my journey a lot was I was a single mom, and I was very broke for quite a while. I wasn't getting child support. And I chose to use this path, healing. People don't really get rich this way. The few get rich this way. Some of us really struggle to pay the bills. I was struggling. And I wanted to know is it true if you're following your spirit's calling, the voice, the small voice inside, will you be provided for? Because there's a promise in the Bible about this, that about the birds being not having to know the flowers of the field, not having to toil, and yet are they clothed such beautiful colors. You know where I'm going with this quote, but I took it as it meaning that we're taken care of, that spirit has our back. It doesn't look like it. It can be a scary world. We see people dying. Some of us have almost died. I've almost died a couple times. And so it can feel very scary. But I wanted to put it to the test. And so I had gone out on an adventure without any money to see if I followed my spirit's calling. And I mean, I did it. Every step was ask a question. Do you want me to go right, left, or straight? To really practice this form of obedience, which of being guidance. I hate the word obedience normally, but I figure that's what people mean in the positive sense of following a spirit. And every time I've done that, I'm amazed at what comes through for me. That and the people that I am providing for, we're always covered. And I think that that's part about having the spiritual coat or cloak of wearing that, and you won't freeze, you won't burn up, that you survive. And even the promise that if those of us who don't survive, does that mean that God's turned from us? No, not at all. It means that the other door's open. Right. Come on in. The one thing I've loved about being a medium, I don't always love being a medium. I'm a reluctant medium as well, because I know it means a lot to people, and I want to get it right. When people want me to talk to the people who've crossed over, and sometimes it's hard. People ask me a lot about if their child committed suicide or not, and things like that. But everybody's always okay. The judgments that I was taught about from an angry God just don't show up. You always see that instead it's us that judges ourselves, and it's done compassionately, the way we would help a child to grow. And even those who have killed themselves, I don't see them burned or abandoned either. There's compassion there, that even the things that people would call a middle ground. I mean, the people who even talk about heaven and purgatory, what I would call it would be there are different layers of the infinity around us, different layers of it, and that there are places we go to study, learn, and to recover when we've been hurt and wounded in this physical world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm glad that we want to have compassion and to help people, prevent people from dying when we can. But I also have checked through those who have died, and what we mostly want for them is peaceful passage, and they mostly want us who are still living, their family, to be at rest in peace, knowing that they're okay. They can still see us and watch out for us. And the worlds just aren't that far apart. That's the main thing I think we need to know now, because a lot of people in my particular field believe very strongly, and I'm actually one of those people, that the earth itself has a consciousness, a life and a presence, and that Gaia, she, if you want to call it a she, it often is, that she's going through her own growth passage from this place we are in time and space known as 3D to a fuller existence in the 5D. And so that means more of us being able to know who we are in the subtle realms. That'll be a whole talk for another day.
Yes.
That one really riles people up.
Yes.
But because again, these are it's suspended knowledge. It's information we're bringing through, but I don't think it's quite like any of us think it is.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of that we can be sure.